Hi, I'm Michael, and this is California. And as we finish off this week, Democrats are still ironing out the final kinks in their $1.9 trillion relief package. The main issue that they are having is figuring out how to include some of the key provisions in the plan that may not exactly pass the smell test of the Senate Parliamentarian. This is because Democrats, out of political necessity, have decided to push through their bill through a process called reconciliation. This process has the advantages of circumventing any sort of real input or lengthy negotiation with Republicans, but it is limited in the types of provisions that it can be used for. The crux of the whole situation is that Democrats, primarily the more progressive-leaning members of the party, so that would be folks like Senator Bernie Sanders out of Vermont, are pushing to include a provision in the most recent relief bill that would increase the national minimum wage up to $15 per hour over the next couple years. This has many Senate Democrats, really all the Republicans, and the Senate Parliamentarian concerned about its effects on the economy, its relevance to the pandemic relief, and whether or not it can legitimately be done through the reconciliation process. So today we are talking about the final steps of the Democrats' $1.9 trillion relief bill and its hopes to increase the minimum wage across America to $15 per hour. Now this is your daily dose, and before we get to it, if you like this information, if you find it interesting, if you find it helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when our newest and most informative videos become available. In the most recent relief bill proposed by President Biden and backed by a large majority of congressional Democrats, and even really a lot of Republicans, one of the shiniest provisions and the most controversial is the inclusion of an increased national minimum wage from $7.25 an hour, where it is right now, up to $15 an hour by 2025. Although in some states and even in some cities, the minimum wage can be vastly higher than this minimum $7.25 an hour, a nationwide $15 minimum wage would be an effective way to bring some Americans above the poverty line and improve the lives of nearly 900,000 Americans who would be brought out of poverty. But it is very important to note that according to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, that's the CBO, it would potentially leave nearly 1.4 million Americans out of work over the next 4 years. This is because with the increase in the minimum wage, businesses would have a lot less money to hire fewer people, all the while having to pay more tax, having a higher overhead cost, and ultimately having less incentives to hire human workers and be more of a reason to bring in robots. And we can already start to see this happening. In current high minimum wage cities, like here in California, we've begun to see the ubiquitous rollout of self-checkout machines in grocery stores, drugstores, and even at Costco, which are replacing jobs that were once solely done only by humans. So needless to say, even achieving this increase in such a short period of time is not necessarily a win-win situation for everybody, despite being a very big victory for Democratic progressives. Another issue with including the $15 provision in the bill when trying to pass it through the reconciliation process is that any provision in the legislation will need to meet very strict guidelines about what can actually be passed and what cannot. The arbiter of this reconciliation process is the Senate Parliamentarian. This position is a nonpartisan position within the Senate that is currently being held by Elizabeth McDonough. On Thursday, after hearing arguments from both Republicans and Democrats, she and her staff, they made a final decision that the $15 minimum wage increase would not be eligible to be passed through the reconciliation process. So what does this mean for the provision? Well, first, it means that at least in the Senate, the $15 minimum wage provision cannot be included in the $1.9 trillion reconciliation bill and will have to be removed from the Senate version of the bill. But on the House side of Congress, Democratic lawmakers led by Nancy Pelosi said that they will still include the $15 per hour minimum wage in their version of the rescue plan, which will likely get approved today. Obviously, the decision by the parliamentarian makes getting the $15 minimum wage passed much more difficult and would lead to the House and the Senate having two different versions of the same exact bill that will eventually have to be revoted on. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer and President Biden have both expressed their disappointment with the decision, but to be fair, it was a bit of a Hail Mary play to begin with. Of course, on the other side of the aisle, Republicans like Lindsey Graham are eager to crow about the parliamentarian's decision. He said, quote, "He is very pleased that the Senate parliamentarian has ruled that the minimum wage increase is an inappropriate policy change in reconciliation. The decision reinforces reconciliation cannot be a vehicle to pass major legislative change by either party on a simple majority vote." End quote. Now, of course, this is being said after Republicans in 2017 passed a massive piece of tax legislation that affected both corporate taxes, Social Security, and dealt a damaging blow to the Affordable Care Act through the exact same process. So where does this leave the prospect of a higher minimum wage for Americans moving forward? Well, at the moment, it means that the Senate Democrats will have to go back to the drawing board and figure out a way to negotiate with Republicans to pass a separate bill that would include the increase in minimum wage through good old-fashioned standard legislation. Although this does seem like a long shot, there are some Senate Republicans and Democrats, like Democrats from Joe Manchin out of Virginia and Republican Mitt Romney from Utah, who were not on board with the $15 minimum wage, but have said that they would back a smaller increase in the national minimum wage to $11 an hour. But even at $11 an hour, the prospect of a nationwide increase in the minimum wage is probably going to be dubious at best, because it would be seen as an essential increase in the cost of doing business, especially at a time when across the country, businesses are still struggling to keep their doors open, even with the current low minimum wage, and all the while being piled on with continued lockdowns and restrictions on doing business for the foreseeable future. Overall, I think this decision by the Parliamentarian is going to be a change that will improve the prospect and the time frame of getting the $1.9 trillion relief package passed and ultimately getting money, resources, and support out to the American people. Yes, of course, it would be nice to get an increase in the minimum wage. But like any big policy changes, there's always winners and losers. Unfortunately, in the case of such a big increase in the minimum wage, the losers, some low-income workers and businesses, seem to outweigh the winners, other fewer lower-income workers. But with a more reasonable number, perhaps one that can be agreed on by both Republicans and Democrats, there might be a happier medium that could achieve the goal of increasing money to low-income earners, decreasing the reliance on government programs, stimulating our economy, and actually being able to get passed. Now, this has been your Daily Dose, and I hope that you found it interesting or helpful or at least useful. And if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can get updates when our newest and most informative videos become available. Now that's it for me, and for California, I'm Michael, wishing you a happy, healthy day.